They saw it as a mess, and it's polled pretty badly, which has added to the political backlash against it. So to some degree, she has to sell this not just to her party, but also to the public on the back of what happened yesterday with the EU, who rejected its call. Quite the ask, I would say. So as intrigued as you are to find out how she goes there with that. So yes, so we expect that statement, I should say, from inside Downing Street. Although the sun has now come out after a deluge, so maybe she'll risk coming out in the rain now the rain's gone. But as I said, that statement is coming in the next 10 to 15 minutes. She has quite the task on her hand, and we did in fact hear from the Brexit Secretary a few moments ago.
Why do you think the EU are not negotiating in place? You'll have to ask them.
Is the only realistic deal a no deal now?
We'll continue to negotiate in good faith, but we'll also make our preparations for no deal. Was it an ambush? Yes, I think it probably was.
I mean, Dominic Raab there has been quite outspoken, really, in his criticism of the EU, saying there that we just heard him saying it was an ambush. Earlier on today, he described some of the behaviour as not very statesmanlike. It does feel, at least, like the Brexiteers, in her cabinet at least, are rallying round her.
Yes, and obviously Dominic Raab has been one of the most long-standing Brexiters before he was in cabinet, so it's important for the Prime Minister to have and maintain that support. On the flip side of this argument, I think that in Europe, they say what happened yesterday, you know, although the tone may not have been what was expected, the substance, the rejection of the facilitated customs arrangement, the rejection of the idea of a common rule book, has been abundantly clear from Team Barnier, not least in a transcript of a discussion with MPs who went over to Brussels, but in speeches. It's been clear from EU 27 leaders that it has been declined. What they did over summer was decline it politely. What they did yesterday was decline it more firmly. And so I think there's a little bit of bemusement that this has been taken so badly, particularly given the context that on Wednesday night the Prime Minister wrote quite a sort of hard newspaper article for a German newspaper that basically implied we can go no further than the Chequers agreement. That's it. That's my limit. And I think that is what I'm told the EU 27 decided it had to react. The difference here being that the EU perceives Chequers as a useful tool upon which to base a negotiation. It signals a potential landing zone for the negotiation, but is not ever, in their eyes, going to be the end point. I think that is the crucial difference. The Prime Minister, in her article in the Welt magazine, the German newspaper, she said, essentially, I cannot go any further. That is what we're told precipitated some of the backlash, some of the stronger words we heard from Donald Tusk and from EU leaders leaving. So whether she chooses to frame it like that when she comes and gives us the statement that we're expecting, you heard her yesterday in her press conference say, in answer to a question from me, that she felt this was all a negotiating tactic. And the big dilemma for Theresa May is, yes, she now needs space domestically, politically, to get it through her party, her conference, and through Parliament, but she still hasn't nailed it down with the EU quite plainly and quite publicly, as we saw yesterday. The question that arises is, in trying to pull these two different forces together, is it even possible? It's a reasonable question that arises out of the events of the past few hours.
OK, Faisal, we'll be back with you very shortly, I'm sure. Well, let's have a look at what led to this imminent statement from the Prime Minister. Theresa May was in the Austrian city of Salzburg trying to sell her so-called Chequers proposals to EU leaders. But Donald Tusk, the head of the European Council, said unless that there is some significant progress at next month's summit, there would be no further negotiations in November.
Everybody shared the view that while there are positive elements in the Chequers proposal, the suggested framework for economic cooperation will not work, not least because it risks undermining the single market. The moment of truth for Brexit negotiations will be the October European Council. In October, we expect maximum progress and results in the Brexit talks. Then we will decide whether conditions are there to call an extraordinary summit in November to finalise and formalise the deal.
Meanwhile, the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte slammed Theresa May's organisation of the Brexit.
I think we have made more preparations for a no deal than the United Kingdom has. But there are, of course, many issues to be dealt with in a no deal scenario. Many issues. And we are dealing with them one by one, obviously aiming for not needing those solutions, because we want to come to a deal. But we have to organise for a no deal at the same time.
Well, let's have a listen to Theresa May now. This is her yesterday, issuing a message of defiance to her EU counterparts. She was speaking after a senior EU official warned that key parts of her Chequers plan would not work.
Look, I have always said that these negotiations were going to be tough. And at various stages of these negotiations, different tactics would be used as part of those negotiations. What I'm focused on is delivering on the vote of the British people, and delivering that in a way which ensures we maintain, we deliver on our commitments of no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, that we do so by retaining the Union of the United Kingdom, and we protect jobs in doing that. The proposal we have put forward is the only proposal on the table that actually delivers on that long-term sustainable future by offering the free and frictionless movement of goods across borders.
Well, someone who was across all of the movements yesterday in Salzburg is Sky's Foreign Affairs editor, Deborah Haynes, who joins us now in the studio. And Deborah, why do you think the European leaders reacted so bluntly, shall we say, to the Chequers proposals?
Well, you have to remember that for the European Union, they have got a track record of standing firm and playing hardball in negotiations and only ever compromising if they're going to compromise at the last moment. So that could be what Theresa May is facing, and we could be seeing from her, a very much a sort of holding the line, standing firm and standing up to them. Also, for the EU 27, there is the fact that they need to demonstrate the benefits of being in the Union. They need, people like President Macron and Angela Merkel of Germany. They want to make sure that people, if they want to leave, see that they can get, punishment and turn people off who are maybe also trying to sort of raise that populist movement of fracturing the union. So there are those two factors weighing in. And as well, there's the very clear divisions between the two sides in terms of issues such as the Northern Ireland question and the overriding framework on trade.
Yeah, some big questions for them to sort out, even to get that withdrawal agreement, of course, isn't it? The thing that really struck me, looking at some of the pictures coming in from Salzburg yesterday, was just how rattled Theresa May looked. It almost was as if she wasn't expecting Salzburg to be such a big news story, for it to be so explosive, which, of course, has ramifications for her within her own party. What was your take on body language between those European leaders?
Well, the images were really sort of representative of Britain, Theresa May, being on the outside. You had that sort of that image that was on the front pages of the papers today of all these men in suits with their backs turned and Theresa May on the edge in her red jacket, very much excluded on the outside. And then there was that rather distasteful, perhaps, photograph that Donald Tusk posted on Instagram of Theresa May sort of trying to grab a cake from a selection of different little tasty cakes, and he sort of put at the bottom, "Sorry, no cherries." And people did really sort of take a bit of an affront to that, because it's obviously sort of poking fun at not cherry picking in terms of the way that the British are seen to be dealing with the Brexit negotiations.
It almost looked as if he'd set that picture up deliberately. I mean, we don't know, but it certainly seemed quite posed, didn't it?
It did, and it's also, given how high the stakes are, and given the very difficult position that Theresa May is in domestically, it's strange. What is the EU tactic making it even more difficult for her, which is what they have done?
Not long to go, of course, until we hear from Theresa May. Her statement due for 1:45. Sometimes, of course, these things can overrun. What's your best guess on what happens next?
Well, I mean, people seem to be indicating that she will be standing firm and holding the line and reiterating her message in terms of the best deal that she sees for Britain in terms of Brexit. What she needs to do really is come the next meeting for the EU heads in October of next month, is to sort of, try and indicate that there have been significant progress in the negotiations, so that this penciled-in meeting in the middle of November, when they're all supposed to come up with a final agreement to put to their respective parliaments, actually goes ahead. People are very sceptical that that timeline will be met.
OK, Deborah Haynes, thank you very much. You're watching Sky News. Coming up, we will be live in Downing Street, where we're expecting to hear from Theresa May very shortly.
Hi, I'm Hannah Stott with the latest showbiz news. A warning, some flash photography is coming up. The big screen version of the hit TV series Downton Abbey will arrive in cinemas in September 2019. The movie will open internationally and in North America on September the 13th and September the 20th, 2019, respectively. The original cast, including Hugh Bonneville, Michelle Dockery, Laura Carmichael and Joanne Froggatt, are all returning for the film. Downton Abbey follows a British aristocratic family in the early 20th century. The series aired for 6 seasons in at least 150 countries and set a record for non-US television shows with 69 Emmy nominations. The future looks female for the Marvel cinema.
Cheers. I can't hear anything.
Anything?
Nope,
No.
nothing. I think we need to be back up.
No, that's very loud, but it's just Atmos.
Yeah. I can't hear anything.
Ah.
I can't,
Yeah, that's it.
I can't hear anything, guys.
You're still not hearing?
No, nothing.
Well, here, take this one then.
Okay.
And I'll sort this one out.
Just pop the cable into that.
Oh no, is it the cable? I can't hear anything.
You sure you can hear it on that? That's all right.
No.
Are you plugged in?
Oh, I can hear you. Yes. Sorry, we just did a cable swap. Sorry, that was a bit ropey. I am, yes. Okay. Apparently there's a power cut or something. Someone seems to have unplugged the telephones. Sure. Well, that's been the direction of travel since the disappointment of the Salzburg summit, that she has stood behind Chequers in spite of the fact that the very people that this compromise was designed for had rejected it so publicly at the moment when we thought, at least, she was going to get some warm words to take to the Tory conference with her. Her cabinet colleagues have been touring the studios and the TV cameras, backing up Chequers. We heard from James Brokenshire earlier. We also caught up with the Environment Secretary, Michael Gove. This was what he had to say earlier today.
The Prime Minister will be negotiating hard for Britain in the days ahead, and her resolution is admirable, and I think it's great that the Prime Minister is standing up for Britain at this time.
Michael Gove there, talking about his support for the Prime Minister after the disappointments of the Salzburg summit. I should say we are running a little bit behind schedule. This was due for 1:45. I don't know what's happened with the broadcast technology inside Downing Street. I'm sure it'll all be up and running fairly soon. But the Prime Minister has a task on her hand, a difficult task in any event, made much more difficult by the reaction, the very public reaction of the EU27 yesterday. She has to persuade the nation now and the Conservative Party and the Conservative members. She has to persuade them that Chequers is worth going through with, even though it seemed to be so publicly rejected yesterday. I think her great hope here will be that Chequers becomes a kind of something that they can strive towards, that in the actual legal text of any withdrawal agreement will be pretty vague, something where the finer details will be negotiated in the transition phase. Her actual negotiation problem right now is the related but different Irish border situation, the so-called backstop. We have not presented further details on that over the past few months. EU27 and particularly Ireland don't like that. She wanted, she told Leo Varadkar, according to Irish sources yesterday, that it would be impossible to flesh out the detail on emerging new proposals that were floated in outline until November. That wasn't good enough for the European Union 27, wasn't good enough for Ireland. Emmanuel Macron backing up Ireland around the conference table at 27 and insisting that there will be no November summit to seal a deal unless substantial progress is made on Northern Ireland. The state of play on that, though, is quite interesting. There is new language coming from the UK and new language coming from Europe. So you can start to see how a deal might be plausible, even though it looks pretty bad from where we're standing right now. And it all revolves around the difference between a customs border, no to that, says the United Kingdom, and a regulatory border between the island of Ireland and Great Britain. Now, this sounds terrible from the DUP standpoint, but it is pointed out, and I think some of this argument is accepted by UK sources, that there already exists some forms of regulatory checks between Great Britain and Ireland, i.e. within the United Kingdom. I think it's mainly cattle. Amazing to think that it could come down to this, that the entire deal, where it might come down to the cows that are transported between Scotland and Northern Ireland. But that is the foundation upon which this compromise is now resting, which is the idea that there are already regulatory checks between Great Britain and Ireland. And that's because across the whole island of Ireland, there's a single regime for agricultural and food standards. That doesn't matter now because we're all in the European Union. In the future, that will be maintained, so some of those checks will increase. In fact, they will greatly increase. That's one of the problems for the man we just heard from, Michael Gove. So all of this, so although it looks pretty bad yesterday, there still is a route map to a deal. Whether the compromises needed to make a deal both on Chequers and with the Irish are possible, given the constraints politically, both within the Conservative Party and, of course, do not forget the DUP, that is the real question. It seemed difficult last week. It seems more difficult now. The Prime Minister has to explain, when we do get the technology working and the statement up and running, the Prime Minister has to explain how she's going to square that circle.
Some big questions for Theresa May to answer, although, as you say, Faisal, there's nothing the EU loves more than a last-minute agreement, so we'll have to watch this space. Thanks very much. We'll be back to you very shortly. Now, in the meantime, the UKIP party leader, Jared Batten, has been speaking at his party's annual conference. He used his speech to credit UKIP with winning the referendum to leave the EU and attacked the Prime Minister's Brexit plans, saying that they were Brexit in name only.
And what's happened in the 2 years and 3 months since? Well, we haven't left the European Union yet, that's for sure. Mrs May and her cross-party Westminster establishment have no intention of fully implementing a complete exit from the European Union if they can possibly avoid it. They'd like to reverse the decision of the referendum altogether, but failing that, they will settle for Brino, Brexit in name only. The so-called deal Mrs May wants to achieve is one whereby we pay the EU lots of money, we obey most of their laws, continue to be subject to the decisions of the Court of Justice of the European Union and have more or less open borders. That will mean leaving in name only. If she can achieve that, then it will leave the way open to take Britain back into the European Union in a few years' time.
Well, it's not just EU leaders that Theresa May needs to convince about the merits of her Chequers plan. She also needs to get enough of her own MPs to back her proposals if she wants to get it through Parliament. And speaking to Adam Bolton on All Out Politics, the Conservative MP John Redwood, a keen Brexiteer, said that there is no cliff edge.
Parliament has legislated just for us to leave, and I don't think we should be paying £39 billion to the EU when they behave like this. There is no cliff edge. We will trade with the EU, like the rest of the world, under WTO rules, as we do for all our business outside the EU at the moment. And even better news, we can choose our own tariff schedules, so we don't have to have the ultra-high tariffs on some items that the EU imposes.
We just got confirmation that the Prime Minister's statement in Downing Street is being delayed by a lack of power in a room. So let's hope that's not a metaphor for what Theresa May has to say. We can go back to Downing Street, where Sky's political editor Faisal Islam is not having any power issues, which is good news for us. Faisal, how do you think Conservative MPs are going to take it if Theresa May decides to rally behind Chequers and insist, as she has been doing, that it's the only credible plan on the table?
Well, we have heard from some Conservative MPs who were Remain voters, who were attracted to some version that looks a little bit like a single market, that they were quite put out by what they saw in Salzburg yesterday, and maybe they're being pushed in the other direction on this argument towards a Canada deal, a free trade agreement, no special arrangements to keep sort of integrated at a high degree with the European Union going forward. I think that she still has some space with her MPs to try to do some sort of Chequers deal up to a point, but she's got to sell it. She's got to sell it. She's got to sell it to the public. She's got to sell it to the membership. And the difficulty is a fundamental question. It was put to me by one MP. What is the point of it? If the point of it was to get the European Union on side, was the point of it to maintain frictionless borders for the car industry? Was the point of it to try to get the Irish border issue solved? All of those arguments that can and will be put perhaps in the next few minutes when we do hear from the Prime Minister, all of those arguments made more difficult by the fact that the EU27 have said what they said yesterday. But I still think that if she can persuade people that there's something in it, something to be negotiated, then she may try to continue it. But the problem is, it does go against what she said in that German newspaper article on Wednesday. Does she really have more to negotiate? The news on the issue of migration has gone a bit quiet. We had that Migration Advisory Committee report a few days ago that suggested, or was taken as suggesting, that the Home Office may not offer any special immigration protection or arrangements for European Union citizens after Brexit. That didn't go down too well in European Union circles either. They pondering, well, that will be reciprocated for UK holidaymakers in France and Spain, the same arrangements. So that issue, well, we haven't even talked about that issue between the UK and the EU in terms of the future relationship. So the question is, I think many people felt that Chequers was a start. More compromises would need to be made. What is she going to say here about the need to make more compromises to get anything like Chequers through? It's very difficult when both the negotiators from Europe and your own MPs, and plenty of the noisy MPs amongst them, find that Chequers, say that the Chequers deal is dead.
Minister. We've heard quite a lot, haven't we, from Brexit supporters, whether or not they're supporting Chequers or not. Michael Gove, Dominic Raab, Andrew Bridgen, to name a few. People who perhaps we haven't heard so much from are the more Remain supporters. Do you think there's an argument that the odds of a second referendum or even a general election might have gone up after what happened at Salzburg?
Well, certainly if the deal doesn't get through Parliament, we're in just incredibly new territory. I mean, all of this is new, but there's no form book for this, there's no guidebook. A lot of stuff gets thrown up in the air. People think they know what's going to happen. Jacob Rees-Mogg thinks that everything continues on because of the Fixed Term Parliament Act, and we just leave on March the 29th, and then at that point the sort of government continues. Others feel that there'll be much more of a constitutional crisis. You've heard that from the likes of the former Foreign Secretary William Hague. I think that the position of the Remainers within the Conservative Party is very interesting. This type of policy, Chequers policy, was briefed by Theresa May to the Remainers and held off that rebellion that we've all forgotten about now in July over the customs union. So Parliament may well have voted for some sort of customs union resolution in July, were it not for the fact that the Prime Minister said to those potential Remain rebels, I have this Chequers thing in my back pocket. I can maintain frictionless trade. Let me give me a bit of space to give this a go, to try and get it negotiated. Just give me the space to do this, to negotiate close customs arrangements whilst maintaining the ability to try to negotiate independent trade deals. That's the key sell of Chequers, if it were possible, if it could be bought by the EU 27. But the Remainers have split a little bit now, the ex-Remainers. You have people like Justine Greening saying that Chequers doesn't have a future, and she is suggesting pretty clearly...
Faisal, we're seeing the Prime Minister now, so we're going to cut straight to Theresa May at Downing Street. Here we go.
Yesterday, I was in Salzburg for talks with European leaders. I have always said that these negotiations would be tough, and they were always bound to be toughest in the final straight. While both sides want a deal, we have to face up to the fact that, despite the progress we have made, there are two big issues where we remain a long way apart. The first is our economic relationship after we have left. Here, the EU is still only offering us two options. The first option would involve the UK staying in the European Economic Area and a customs union with the EU. In plain English, this would mean we'd still have to abide by all the EU rules. Uncontrolled immigration from the EU would continue, and we couldn't do trade deals we want with other countries. That would make a mockery of the referendum we had 2 years ago. The second option would be a basic free trade agreement for Great Britain that would introduce checks at the Great Britain-EU border. But even worse, Northern Ireland would effectively remain in the customs union and parts of the single market, permanently separated economically from the rest of the UK by a border down the Irish Sea. Parliament has already unanimously rejected this idea. Creating any form of customs border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK would not respect that Northern Ireland is an integral part of the United Kingdom, in line with the principle of consent as set out clearly in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. It is something I will never agree to. Indeed, in my judgment, it is something no British Prime Minister would ever agree to. If the EU believe I will, they are making a fundamental mistake. Anything which fails to respect the referendum or which effectively divides our country in two would be a bad deal. And I have always said, no deal is better than a bad deal. But I have also been clear that the best outcome is for the UK to leave with a deal. That is why, following months of intensive work and detailed discussions, we proposed a third option for our future economic relationship based on the frictionless trade in goods. That is the best way to protect jobs here and in the EU, and to avoid a hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, while respecting the referendum result and the integrity of the United Kingdom. Yesterday, Donald Tusk said our proposals would undermine the single market. He didn't explain how in any detail or make any counter-proposal. So we are at an impasse. The second issue is connected to the first. We both agree that the withdrawal agreement needs to include a backstop to ensure that if there's a delay in implementing our new relationship, there still won't be a hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. But the EU is proposing to achieve this by effectively keeping Northern Ireland in the customs union. As I have already said, that is unacceptable. We will never agree to it. It would mean breaking up our country. We will set out our alternative that preserves the integrity of the UK, and it will be in line with the commitments we made back in December, including the commitment that no new regulatory barriers should be created between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK unless the Northern Ireland Executive and Assembly agree. As I told EU leaders, neither side should demand the unacceptable of the other. We cannot accept anything that threatens the integrity of our union, just as they cannot accept anything that threatens the integrity of theirs. We cannot accept anything that does not respect the result of the referendum, just as they cannot accept anything that is not in the interests of their citizens. Throughout this process, I have treated the EU with nothing but respect. The UK expects the same. A good relationship at the end of this process depends on it. At this late stage in the negotiations, it is not acceptable to simply reject the other side's proposals without a detailed explanation and counter-proposals. So we now need to hear from the EU what the real issues are and what their alternative is so that we can discuss them. Until we do, we cannot make progress. In the meantime, we must and will continue the work of preparing ourselves for no deal. In particular, I want to clarify our approach to two issues. First, there are over 3 million EU citizens living in the UK who will be understandably worried about what the outcome of yesterday's summit means for their future. I want to be clear with you that even in the event of no deal, your rights will be protected. You are our friends, our neighbours, our colleagues. We want you to stay. Second, I want to reassure the people of Northern Ireland that in the event of no deal, we will do everything in our power to prevent a return to a hard border. Let me also say this. The referendum was the largest democratic exercise this country has ever undergone. To deny its legitimacy or frustrate its result threatens public trust in our democracy. That is why, for over 2 years, I have worked day and night to deliver a deal that sees the UK leave the EU. I have worked to bring people with me, even when that has not always seemed possible. No one wants a good deal more than me, but the EU should be clear. I will not overturn the result of the referendum, nor will I break up my country. We need serious engagement on resolving the two big problems in the negotiations, and we stand ready.
Theresa May there giving her reaction to that summit in Salzburg, saying that she will not overturn the results of the referendum or break up the country. She also had some pretty strong words to EU leaders, saying, I have treated the EU with nothing but respect. The UK expects the same back. Well, let's bring in Faisal Islam, our political editor, who's been looking through and listening along with the rest of us to what the Prime Minister had to say. And it was pretty clear, wasn't it, from what Theresa May was saying, that they are at a total impasse, that there is no progress effectively that's been made on some of those key issues, including the future economic relationship and also, of course, that tricky Irish border backstop issue.
Yeah, fighting talk there from the Prime Minister, defending her Chequers proposals, and I think there was, asking the EU essentially to show her and the British people some respect in terms of the negotiations. I think there was some news in there as well. I detected there a sort of unilateral guarantee in the event of no deal to EU citizens, saying their rights would be protected. That is language we have not necessarily had before when that question has been asked. It's an obvious question that if you're preparing for no deal as a government, should EU citizens, the 3 million of them, should they also prepare for no deal? Because all of that agreement that was settled months ago now, almost a year ago, was contingent on a deal being done. So it's a very real question for millions of people as to what applies. She has now said to 3 million EU citizens in the UK that their rights will be unilaterally protected, even if there's no deal, which is an important guarantee. She said that was a direct result of what happened yesterday. Remember, there was a big controversy. It's said by the Cabinet at the time that the day after the Brexit referendum, some in Cabinet wanted to do that, and they pointed the finger, frankly, towards the Home Office as to why that was not the case. But still, it's happened now. The Prime Minister sending a message to EU citizens that their rights are protected. But strong words about the issue of both the Chequers agreement and the Irish backstop. She said that the EU proposals either would offer uncontrolled migration to continue and make a mockery of the referendum, or would lead to a division within the United Kingdom, which would lead to permanent economic separation. Both she rejects. Both she could not accept as Prime Minister. Anything which fails to respect the referendum or divides our country, and that's a reference to the current incarnation of the European Union version of the backstop agreement, will be a bad deal. And she reminds us that a bad deal, she's always said, that no deal, I should say, is better than a bad deal. Now, however, if you read very carefully what she said about her backstop arrangement, the text that she has now promised on camera to bring forward, she says that there will be no customs barrier between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. But she left open the notion that there could be a regulatory barrier if the Northern Ireland Assembly agrees to it. So I think what we got there was a hint that if the Northern Irish politicians at the Assembly, remember the Assembly is not up and running, but if they did agree to further regulatory divergence on the island of Ireland, designed to converge Northern Ireland with the Republic and the rest of the EU, if that was agreed in a devolved way, that could be an acceptable part of the United Kingdom offer on a withdrawal agreement, Irish backstop. So to reiterate, this would not be a customs border, but it would be a type of regulatory border, building on what I told you before already exists, frankly, for cattle, adding to that other areas under the consent of the Northern Irish Assembly under devolution arrangements. So she's hinting, I believe, I haven't had any briefing on this, we haven't been able to ask questions about it, but I think she's clearly signalling a way forward on Northern Ireland that she hopes will be accepted. Now, I don't see how the Europeans would accept that Northern Ireland would be part of would have different tariffs and different customs arrangements. But then again, I don't see how the DUP and Tory Brexiters would accept Northern Ireland essentially not being part of future trade deals, which would be Great Britain only and not UK-wide. So there's the dilemma, but there's the compromise she's hinted at. So yes, tough fighting talk about refusing the offers on the table from the EU, but pointing towards compromises on what might be seen by some as a regulatory border in the Irish Sea, and an offer to EU citizens, effectively unilaterally, to maintain their rights, even if there is no deal.
Thank you, Faisal. Very interesting stuff. And as you were saying, a very different demeanour from Theresa May compared to yesterday. Well, let's bring in our Foreign Affairs editor, Deborah Haynes, who's also listening to that. I mean, it was She was a very different woman, if you like, from that press conference yesterday. She seemed rattled then. Today, she came out swinging, and she had some pretty stern words directed at the EU leaders, I thought, as well. I have treated the EU with nothing but respect. The UK expects the same. And she also effectively said that we need to hear an alternative plan from the EU, and unless they come up with something, there'll be no progress.
Absolutely. She's very much hitting the ball back into the EU's court. I thought it was interesting how she said in this stage of a negotiation, when you're right down near to the finishing line, it's not acceptable simply to reject a proposal from one side without offering some kind of proposal on your side. And so she's sort of saying to them, you can't just reject the Chequers proposals without a detailed explanation as to why it's being rejected and offer some alternative, some way forward, because the way things were left yesterday was it was still up to Theresa May to come up with some sort of solution to make this magic work. And she's very much holding her line, saying they've budged. The UK side has been willing to move on their red lines, and there's been nothing from the EU. And I think this is a moment when we really see whether or not the UK is this big power in Europe. Are we big enough? Are we big enough of a country for them to actually care that she's saying this? Or have we actually been so marginalised that she can stamp and shout all she likes, but they're still not going to budge and we're going to crash out?
Are we just going to get another jokey Instagram post from Donald Tusk, I suppose, is the question. I mean, I guess, could the EU argue that they have actually put some proposals forward? They have offered, for example, a customs union EEA-style relationship that she doesn't want to see because it would mean free movement of people and abiding by EU rules, or a basic free trade deal that, again, Theresa May has rejected because it would mean effectively a border in the RSC.
Well, exactly, and I thought it was really interesting that when she sort of summed up about that, she sort of said how it's not sensible to come up with solutions that are unacceptable to the UK.
So they should have
side.
known that, basically.
But then equally, she said, which I thought was interesting, that obviously on the UK side, they can't come up with proposals that would be unacceptable to the EU, that would challenge the integrity of the EU. But you could imagine the EU sort of saying, well, Brexit does challenge the integrity of the EU. So the very fact that we're leaving actually doesn't meet that sort of the description that she sort of set out.
Are you getting a sense of a kind of relationship breaking down? Because it did feel as if she was very frustrated and perhaps slightly offended, if you like, by perhaps the way that she at least perceives that she's been treated by the European Union.